Well, hello everybody. For those of you who are new here, I'm Flick and this is my husband Tim, and we are the owners of Château de Pernon. We purchased the chateau 5 years ago now, nearly 6 years actually, and we receive a lot of questions about the project here, and so today we are going to answer as many of your questions that you have submitted as possible, including some of the nitty-gritty, most asked questions about finance.
Let's get straight into it.
So the first question is a very simple one, but because it's autumn here, the park has got splendid colours, and behind us is a particular tree that has put on an enormous show of colour. What is the tree?
This is a question we've been asked a lot. It's an Acer rubrum autumn red. It's a maple, so our Canadian friends guessed that. So we had lots of questions about money. How much did we pay for Château de Pernon?
We paid €740,000 for the chateau itself, for 18 outbuildings in various stages of decay, and for the 23 hectares, about 60 acres of parks and gardens.
And that was in 2020?
In 2020. More money questions. So how much has the restoration cost so far?
Well, so far, let's break it into two parts. You can see the stage one works behind us on the facade and the exterior of the chateau. So that's the roof, the oak frame, all of the stone facades, the stonework, a lot of the carpentry and joinery, so the shutters, some of the windows, the chimney stacks, some of the statues, and the slate tile roof, the incredible slate shingle roof. All of that work together cost approximately 2.7 million euros. And we've spent another $500,000 or so on a number of other projects around the estate. So that's the roof of our wine barrel room and the facades of that, which some of you might have seen in some of our earlier videos, the dry moat wall restoration on the east side, one of our large walls in our basse cour or our farmyard, which has 10 small cellars in it. We had that restored because it had started to collapse. And we've had a lot of electrical and plumbing work done inside the chateau, and we've installed a new heating system. So all of those works together, we estimate cost maybe something in the order of €500,000. So that's the restoration costs so far, but a lot of you are asking, what do we expect the total cost, the final budget to be to restore everything across the estate, inside the chateau, all of the outbuildings and the parks and gardens? Flick, what's the answer to that question?
The honest answer is it is impossible to know. This is a project that's going to take our lifetime, and we have so much work to do. It's really way too complicated for us to put a price on how much it's going to cost. We cost up a project each time before we do it, so we have a schedule of works that work from our highest priorities to our lowest priorities, but unfortunately, it's an impossible question to answer. This is probably one of our most frequently asked questions. How on the earth are we paying for it all?
It is a great question. It's a question we ask ourselves all the time as well. And really the short answer is this. We've committed our life savings. We've been generously supported by the French government, and we fundraise. So let's break that down. We do receive financial support from the French government. We couldn't do this project without that support, and we receive grants to a fixed percentage of the costs of certain parts of the heritage listed elements of the chateau. Now, we've also committed our life savings. What does that mean? Well, we lived in Paris before coming here to Château de Pernon. We sold that apartment, and the funds that we received from the sale of the Paris apartment basically paid for the purchase of Château de Pernon. We also had a townhouse in our home city of Melbourne. We sold that, and it was our intention for that to fund the restoration of Pernon with the contribution from the French government. How naive we were.
Yeah.
But we had to get that money from Australia here to France. And really this was one of the big risks of our project when we first set out. We obviously had to manage the exchange rate risk and the costs of bringing that money across from Melbourne. And we did a lot of research to find the best financial platform for carrying out those financial transfers, and we discovered that Wise were the best platform for doing so. There were no hidden fees. They made the transfers lightning fast, and because they use a middle market rate with no hidden fees, then they're typically cheaper than traditional banks. So we were able to bring that money in tranches across from Australia to France. We were doing it in the middle of COVID, so the Australian dollar was jumping all over the place. It was really quite a nervous moment for us, but working with Wise gave us great peace of mind, and really they've become great partners in our project.
I mean, we're so grateful for their support, and who could have known that when we were using them back in 2020 that they would become a partner of ours here. And actually, to celebrate our partnership, Wise are offering you a fee-free transfer of up to €1,000. So to check out the details and take advantage of that great offer, click on the link in the description below.
And we fundraise. Well, what does that mean? Well, we fundraise via YouTube. So every time you watch one of our videos, you're supporting the restoration of Château de Pernon because we receive a percentage of the advertising revenue. We are supported via Patreon. So we have lots of YouTube Patreon access members and Patreon members, and the exclusive videos that they get to see help support the restoration of Pernon. We receive revenue from the sales of our book, Château Reawakening, the beautiful handcrafted slate tiles that come from the reclaimed slate from the roof of the chateau through donations. All of these things help support the restoration of Château de Pernon. Now, I should say this is not a plea for financial support. It's an answer, an honest answer to the question of how we're financing the stupendous project of restoring a heritage listed chateau like Château de Pernon. Now, some people have asked about the French government's support, and particularly whether that support results in the French government having some form of ownership over the chateau. Flick, can you explain a little bit of that?
So I think to explain this, it's good to understand how the level of protection of historic properties in France works. There are two different classifications. There's Classé Monument Historique, which is the highest level of protection, and then there is Inscrit, which is a more regional level of protection and a lesser level of protection. And so for both Inscrit and Classé Monument Historique, you're able to receive grants for the government to support the work. The grant is higher for a Classé element of the property than an Inscrit element. And in accepting those grants, we need to ensure that we work with an architect who's approved to work with a historic monument, that we use artisans that are skilled and approved to work on a historic monument, but we retain the ownership of the chateau.
A really interesting question that we get asked quite a lot.
Yeah, it is. Okay, next question. You ready?
No, ready.
How did the chateau come to be in the state it was when we found it? And when did it start to decline?
When we found Château de Pernon in 2020, really it was on the verge of being lost forever. The roof was really starting to go, and on a building like this, once the roof goes, the decline of the rest of the building really occurs very, very rapidly. So while it can hold up for a long time, if the roof is sound, the minute the roof goes, really that's it. The chance to save it is lost. And so that was the circumstances in which we found Château de Pernon in 2020, and people often ask, well, how did it get like that? And I think in order to understand this, we really need to understand a little bit of French history. And if we go back to the 19th century, labour in agricultural communities in rural parts of France was relatively cheap. So people who owned these properties could employ lots of people to work as gardeners, as cooks, as servants and valets inside the building. And it really wasn't that expensive for these very rich aristocratic families to have a large workforce supporting a property like Pernon. Now, at the beginning of the 20th century, of course, the tragedy of the First World War. And for France, it was not just a human tragedy, but it was a demographic tragedy as well. The sheer scale of the loss of French lives on the Western Front caused a demographic crisis, and it really continues in some form to this day. And what it meant is that after the war, these homes became completely uneconomic. You couldn't find the gardeners, the valets, the servants, the cooks, etc. And so the staff in a place like Pernon just shrank enormously. And so it became very difficult to look after and maintain these properties. And the reason for having so many rooms inside the chateau and so many outbuildings disappeared because there weren't so many people living on the estate. And so really that's when the decline of Château de Pernon started, after the First World War. Go forward, with each successive generation, it became more complex and more difficult as the size of the workforce here declined. And by the time the Marquis passed away in 2013, then the chateau was owned by many different branches of the same family. In fact, when we purchased Pernon, there were 11 different owners. And you can imagine how difficult it is within a family, with all the different circumstances, the different points people are at in their lives, to get people to agree on marshalling the funds to carry out a major restoration like the one that Pernon required. Yeah. It's really quite impossible. And so really the only thing that you can do, the only responsible thing that you can do, is to put the chateau on the market and sell it. And that's what the family that we purchased Pernon from, that's what they did.
I think it's important to note also that there wasn't actually anybody living at Pernon when we purchased the chateau in 2020, and it hadn't had someone living here full-time or a family living here full-time for quite a few decades.
Yeah, that's right. And they basically would shut down different wings of the chateau gradually with each generation because people weren't living there anymore. And obviously, if no one's living in a particular part of the chateau, if there's a ceiling leak or an electrical fault or a plumbing problem or whatever, there's nobody there to see it, to monitor it, and to do anything about it. And so it does become really, really difficult. Now, what about a more specific question? We get asked a lot about the soft stone from which Pernon is constructed. People ask, what is the story with this stone? Why do we use it? And how long will it last?
So to start with the first part of that question, the stone that Pernon is built out of is a local stone. It's called tuffeau. And the stone that we are using in the restoration actually comes from a quarry that is only about 20 minutes from here. So it's very close, very local. It's the stone that's used in all the Loire Valley chateaux actually. And it's true, it is a soft porous stone. But the reason that the stone here at Pernon was so deteriorated by the time we arrived was because of the issue with the zinc guttering and that the stone hadn't been protected properly. So water is able to then penetrate the stone, and as soon as that happens, the deterioration of the stone is quite rapid. And so with the restoration of Pernon's roof and the new copper gutters installed on the roof, the stone should be protected for centuries to come, and there shouldn't be any of that deterioration caused by the rain infiltrating the stone.
So the tuffeau is a limestone.
Yes.
Do we treat it in any way?
So we do one treatment. It's an anti-moss treatment, and that's the only treatment that the stone receives.
Okay.
Okay, so we get lots of questions about the lions and the bridge, so I'm going to fire them to you one at a time.
Okay.
So Cindy would like to know, are we replacing the lions?
So yes, the lions will be replaced. You've seen them come off the bridge for those who've been following. They were way too far gone to be able to restore them. They were made of the soft tuffeau stone, and so they will be replicated in the workshop of the sculptor who's working on them.
And I think it's important to note that actually the replicas are not going to be made out of tuffeau. They're going to be made out of the same stone that the royal busts on the roof were made out of, and that is a more durable stone.
Yep, so they'll last a lot longer than the lions that have guarded Pernon for the last 2.5 centuries.
Yeah. Edna would like to know, when will they be back?
Well, we can't say for sure, but they'll be worked on later this year and at the start of next year, and we're hoping that they'll arrive and be put back in place in February 2026.
So exciting. Terry has asked about the pedestals that the lions sit on.
Okay, great question. So the existing pedestals are also too far deteriorated. So even though they haven't been removed yet, they will be taken off. The new pedestals have arrived. They'll be put in place and they'll be shaped in situ by our stonemasons.
And in terms of the bridge, so there's 3 different questions we received about the bridge. The first one is, what are the rooms underneath the bridge?
Okay, there are 2 rooms under the bridge. One at the southern end, which used to house, when the chateau was originally constructed, it housed the laundry, and there are still some last vestiges of the laundry in place. It then, at the end of the 19th century, became something of a little mini dairy, and they would churn butter in that room. And then more recently, it had the storage tanks for the fuel for the heating system inside the chateau. And shortly after we arrived, we decommissioned that system that relied on hydrocarbons, replaced it with a biomass system, and we had those fuel tanks removed. The room at the other end, at the northern end, if you like, is really the entrance, one of the entrances into our basement. And the door of that entrance, which had been blocked up sometime in the early 20th century, has now been unblocked. We're taking it back to its original 18th century form, and you'll be able to enter the basement through one of those traditional doors.
Yeah, and someone with a very eagle eye noticed that there was some support structures under the bridge.
Yeah, those temporary support structures were in place while we had an excavator working on the bridge itself as part of the restoration. So to make sure there was enough support while the excavator was working, the stonemasons put up some temporary supports. They've now been taken down.
And the final question about the bridge is, what are the two windows at the end of the bridge?
Okay, another person with a very eagle eye has noticed the two windows really on the southern side of the facade at the end of the bridge. And one of them goes into what is now our kitchen, and the other one goes into what is one of our toilets. But originally, when the chateau was constructed, those two small rooms were actually guardrobes for the people who would have protected the family and worked with the family back at the end of the 18th century. And we think that they're the rooms where they would have taken off their boots, they would have hung up their coats, and possibly, if they were armed, they would have left their swords there, because you wouldn't have bought those sorts of armaments inside the house. Now, this is the end of the 18th century. France was a much safer place than it was a couple of centuries before, so it's quite possible that they weren't armed, but that's how those rooms were used when the chateau was first constructed. Now, we've had a lot of questions about the parks and gardens.
Yeah.
And the first one really goes right back to the start. And one of you asked, we'd mentioned an archaeological study that was done as part of the work on the parks and gardens. Can we talk a little bit more about that?
So when we arrived, the parks and gardens weren't part of the historic classification of the domain, and we moved to have them listed. So the parks and gardens are now Inscrit Monument Historique. And one of the conditions of having the parks and gardens now inscrit is that we need to do a diagnostic study before we can start anything. It's the same with the chateau. Every time we start a lot of work, our architect needs to do a thorough diagnostic study before any works can start. And so he did an incredible diagnostic study. We actually have the original 18th century plans for the parks and gardens, and it had always been our thought that they'd never been executed, that the chateau was finished just before the revolution arrived, and then after the revolution, tastes changed, and so an English park was put in place here. We were completely wrong. The architect found that, in fact, the original 18th century gardens had been created here. They were extensive gardens, very formal gardens, huge parterres, huge hedges. Like, think of the formal gardens at Versailles, and that is what was happening here in the back.
Yeah, I mean, what an astonishing discovery.
Incredible.
To go from just believing that it was this English park to learning that in fact it was these huge parks and gardens.
Yep, and so how did he find all this information? So there's some very old trees here, so they were able to date the trees. He actually did a lot of aerial work and looked at old aerial photographs as well, found the original stone wall that cut the park, what is the current park, in half.
Yep.
And then there were other elements as well that had been a little bit mysterious to us. There's a large stone basin that we always thought had been a glacier, so an 18th century freezer really. That was actually a stone basin for a water feature that sat in the parterre. And then a ha-ha right at the end of the northern side of the domain that was always a mystery to us, and it now makes sense that it was part of that huge parterre that sat this whole way along the western side of the domain.
So the archaeological study was really part of that diagnostic study that uncovered all of this rich information about the history and the evolution of the park here.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so we get a lot of questions about what our plans are for the parks and gardens.
Yeah, so we're working with Ian Barker, an Australian landscape designer, who is developing a master plan for all of the parks and gardens here at Bernhard. As Flick said earlier, there's 23 hectares of land that we need to really plan for over time. And Ian comes each year. He stays for a week or sometimes a couple of weeks. He's walked every millimetre of the grounds of the Chateau Park and sketched and drawn. He's worked worked with our architect. He obviously has the benefit of this incredible study that's been done on the evolution of the park, and so he can use that. And he also has his own experience. He's a Chelsea award-winning landscape designer, and so those plans are now in a very high state of development.
Yeah.
And we're going to start executing the plans in a series of stages. The first one will be immediately around the chateau itself, where there are paths that need to be rehabilitated following all the work with the trucks, etc. on site. And we also need to deal with the issue of parking, and we need to do so in a way that is practical and in a way that's aesthetically pleasing and respects the spirit of the chateau's evolution. And he's come up with some great plans for that, and so we look forward to sharing the plans for the parks and gardens in the months ahead.
Yeah, so the first stage of works that we're doing with Ian's plans is not the sexiest of them, but the most practical.
No, absolutely. So sticking with the theme of the parks and gardens, we've had a number of questions from people asking how are we going to maintain the estate in the years ahead?
It's a really good question. We do get a lot of feedback on this because people think that we will need a huge army or a huge team to help us with the parks and gardens, and we completely acknowledge that we will require assistance once the plans are fully executed. But some of our work with Ian has involved ensuring that the gardens that we create here are practical for us to manage. So in short, we will definitely need help, but it certainly won't be on the same scale that they would have required here previously.
Thank goodness.
Okay, next question. Oh, do we use a metal detector? And if so, what have we found?
Well, there are clearly a band of dedicated metal detectorists out there because we do get this question from time to time. And fortunately, for one of my birthdays, Flick gifted me a wonderful metal detector and we get out and use it pretty regularly. And we find not the greatest treasures, but we do find lots of old agricultural implements, everyday items, things like belt buckles. We found the leg of one of the beautiful 19th century outdoor chairs. We found lots of tools. We did find a Roman coin, but I do want to say we didn't find the Roman coin with the metal detector. We actually found it before the metal detector arrived, and that's really been one of our most remarkable discoveries here in the park because it was so unexpected, a coin from the era of Augustus. But I do want to make it clear that that was not found with the metal detector.
We did use it a lot in the dry moat when they were churning over so much soil there to ensure that we didn't miss anything.
No, absolutely. It's proven very, very useful. Now, the pool. There is a pool here on the estate and we get asked about it. Where is it and who installed it?
So yes, we do have a pool. It's located on the eastern side of the domain.
And
whoa,
all of
that's
this
so beautiful.
autumnal leaves. I wonder why they call it fall.
And it was constructed in the 1990s by the previous owners. It is in a very discreet position because that is part of the property being Class A Monument Historique, so you can't put a pool anywhere that would visually impact the chateau itself. So it is in a nice discreet spot, and we actually, when we arrived, it had a tree growing out of it, and of course it wasn't usable. So one of the first projects we did was actually to put the pool back into service. It hasn't had a full restoration. In fact, it's part of the work that we're doing with Ian Barker, and the landscaping around the pool will happen in the future. But it did give us a place to retreat to when we were really uncomfortable and where the chateau was not a very pleasant place to be.
Yes, thank goodness for the pool.
We received some questions about the deer that sits on the terrace wall. What is it? What's it made from? Does it need to be restored? Why is it there?
Okay, great question, because we've never talked about this deer before. Many people will have seen it in the photos. If you see photos of the terrace of Château de Pernon, you can see this deer sitting on the balustrade of the terrace.
It's such a feature of the terrace.
It is, and it's one of the first things you notice when you arrive at the chateau. So it's made from terracotta, so it's not solid stone. In fact, if you tap on it lightly, you can hear that it's hollow.
Yeah.
We think it was installed sometime at the end of the 19th century, so it's not an original feature of the chateau. It's got a cement head, and the cement head is because at some stage the original head fell off and a small repair work was done by someone. Now it has antlers on it, and the antlers are actually original antlers taken from a deer that was presumably hunted somewhere in the forest. And so we think it's kind of curious that that's a feature of this statue. Now, why is it there? Well, we think it's a nod to the chateau's heritage as a hunting estate. There's always been hunting here at Pernon. The massive forest extends out in front of the chateau, and for generations people have hunted there, and we think that's why there is this deer sitting on the balustrade of the terrace. Now, it's worth noting that the terrace, in the shape that it has at the moment, is almost certainly not the original shape that it would have been at the end of the 18th century. It has changed. And the oval lawn that you see in front of the chateau, that we call the cour d'honneur, and the shape of the pathways that lead up to the chateau were almost certainly added at the end of the 19th century or in the early 20th century, when cars started to be used, and when they needed an approach to the chateau that reflected that mode of transport. And so we're really reflecting very carefully with our architect and with our landscape designer as to how that front part of the chateau should look in the longer term, because it certainly didn't look like it does today when the chateau was constructed at the end of the 18th century. Now, it's finally time to head inside the chateau, and I know lots of people asked questions about the interiors, so let's get into some of those questions. The first one, and a question that's asked often, where do we live?
It is such a good question. So we live in a section of the chateau that was the only habitable section of the chateau when we first arrived. And there is the formal dining room there. There's also a small sort of temporary kitchen that was put in probably the 60s. There's a living room, a bedroom, and this sort of like pieced together bathroom. And this is located on the ground floor in the eastern wing. And as the restoration of the first floor rooms has started to unfold, in summertime we actually move up to the first floor. We move up there because it's more comfortable now. Some of the bathrooms are done, so we have proper bathrooms and showers. And it's also just more beautiful. We choose a room on the southern side and it just gets this really beautiful light. And so during summertime, it's really lovely up there. And now at this time of the year, we start to retreat back down to the ground floor, turn the heating on, and very soon we'll move back to the ground floor again.
Yeah, so at the moment, if you can see the facade of the chateau, the room that we're staying in is actually the one on the eastern side with the shutters open, getting the beautiful morning light that streams in during autumn, and it's really quite a magical place to wake up.
It really is. So still on the insides, entresols. People are intrigued by the entresols. What are they and how many are there?
Okay, so the entresols are the mezzanine levels, or the floors between the floors, if you like. And at Pernon, between the ground floor and the first floor, or if you're North American, between the first floor and the second floor, but to maintain the flow of the explanation, between the ground floor and the first floor, the architect that constructed Château de Pernon installed a series of small rooms with low ceilings. And these rooms were used for the domestic staff. And what it meant was that the domestic staff would be close by the noble family that they were serving, but somewhat out of sight. So it was a very neat solution to that question of keeping the domestic staff close, but not too close. Now, there are 6 entresols at Château de Pernon, or 6 rooms that are these mezzanine levels between the ground floor and the first floor. And one of these rooms, or a couple of these rooms really, we featured in last week's video, where you were talking about turning one of them, or a couple of them, into an archive room. So can you tell us a little bit more about that project?
So we have an incredible collection of documents that we discovered here. Some of them date back to before the Revolution, and we need somewhere secure and safe and dry to store them. And so these 2 rooms will become our archive rooms. We will lime wash the walls, clean them up. They're pretty dirty at the moment, and then we'll install proper archival storage systems, and it will be a wonderful place to have all our archives.
And over time we hope to be able to digitalise some of those records. There are also archives from Château de Pernon that are held by the French government in the departmental archives. They're also being restored and digitalised, and they're properly protected. And so we hope that the archives are not only something for us to enjoy, but something that researchers and people who are interested in this period of French history, that they'll also be able to use from time to time.
Yeah, it's a really exciting project for us, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be fantastic.
Yeah. So Jeff asked, what is our favourite room?
For me, this is an easy question. It's Edouard's room. Now, which room is Edouard's room? It's on the first floor. It's at the top of our main staircase, and really it's right in the centre of the chateau, looking out to the north, which means it has the most majestic view.
Incredible.
Straight down the barrel of the Grande Allée. So I love the view from this room. It was originally a bedroom, but now we're turning it into a small salon that will have wonderful bookcases installed in it. Which means it's a room that's right after my heart, because we've been collecting antiquarian books for some time now, and we've uncovered a wonderful collection here at the Chateau, and so these books will be displayed in this room, in these bookcases. And also it has the Pernon wallpaper, the wallpaper that was discovered here at the Chateau, and the motif that Farrow and Ball have turned into the namesake wallpaper from the Pernon Papers collection, and it graces the walls of this room, and I absolutely love it. And so, Hun, what about your favourite room?
Well, talking about wallpaper, actually my favourite room is Auguste's room, and Auguste's room is actually the bedroom that we're sleeping in at the moment. The reason this is my favourite room is because it has the most spectacular original 18th century wallpaper. It was a wallpaper that was made by the Revillon workshop in Paris. And in fact, this room is quite interesting because Auguste was the eldest son of the Marquis and the Marquise, and when the chateau was constructed, he was actually boarding in Paris at the École Militaire. He was there with Napoleon, but he was killed in a massacre in Lyon at the start of the Revolution, which means that really he wouldn't have spent much time in that room at all, if at all. But it is really such a beautiful room.
So Auguste was the eldest son, so he would have been expected to inherit the chateau. And so when he died, when he was killed in Lyon, what happened?
So the inheritance of the chateau was then handed down to Edouard, who was the sole remaining child, because they'd had 3 children. Adelaide had passed away during the Revolution around the same time as Auguste, and so Edouard was the sole surviving child.
Yeah, a really sad time for the family.
Yeah. So the next one is 2 similar questions. Are we returning all the rooms to how they were used in the 18th century? And are we returning all the rooms to how they were decorated in the 18th century? Okay,
so regarding use, I think we can say this about Pernon. When the chateau was first constructed, many of the bedrooms were designed on a 3-room apartment layout. So the main room was the room for the family member or the guest who was sleeping in it. A second room was for their valet or their domestic servant who looked after them. And a third room was a dressing room, and that's the way many of the bedrooms are designed at Pernon. Now this is fantastic for us because we want to maintain the original floor plan of the chateau as much as possible. In fact, we really are strictly respecting the original floor plan. But we're not using the rooms as they were originally designed, because obviously people who come to the chateau, they don't come with domestic servants or valets.
Surprise, surprise.
And we certainly don't have any. We don't really need dressing rooms as such, but we do need modern bathrooms and WCs. And so these small rooms are perfect for converting into those sorts of spaces right next to the bedrooms. We're not going to use the original kitchen as our main kitchen. It's in the basement, it's not very practical, but we have identified a space on the ground floor that will make a fantastic kitchen for a modern home. And so we're not using the rooms strictly as they were allocated at the end of the 18th century, because it doesn't make any sense. But as far as appearance is concerned, we try as much as possible to respect the original decor of the rooms. And so we try and match paint colours. We certainly try and preserve wallpapers where we find them in good condition. And we spent a lot of time working with our architect trying to replicate those original decorative features, because for us this is a heritage restoration. It's about authenticity, it's about respecting the original spirit of the building, and we're trying to do that as much as possible. by respecting the original 18th century aesthetic that would have been here at Pernon when it was first constructed. So having said all that about respecting the original decorative elements of the chateau, there is one room where that's not the case, and that's the Grand Salon. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so people have noticed that the Grand Salon decor is not necessarily in keeping with the rest of the chateau. The Grand Salon had a facelift in the late 19th century. So the entire inside of the chateau is in the style of Louis XVI, where we have very straight lines and geometric shapes. But the Grand Salon was modified to be in the style of Louis XV, so it's Rococo, it's got very decorative elements, lots of curves and so on. And because this change was made in the 19th century, it now forms part of the history of Pernon. And so when we restore the Grand Salon, which is about to start the restoration of those principal rooms, it's actually going to stay with the modifications that were made in the 19th century. And so the decision to keep the Rococo style, the Louis XV style in the Grand Salon, was really a decision that was led by our architect, which leads to our next question, which is a great question. Do we have differences of opinion with our architect? And if so, how are they solved?
So we are required by law to use a heritage architect to lead this restoration. And we are so thankful that we selected Frédéric Didier. He's one of the great heritage architects in France. He's the architect in charge at the Chateau of Versailles. We are extraordinarily lucky to have someone of his experience and his skill to lead us on this journey. We really couldn't do it without him. But like any project like this, there are from time to time differences of opinion. But the great thing about our relationship with Monsieur Didier is that both Flick and I and Frédéric Didier share the same vision for the restoration of Chateau de Pernon. And that is that it is a heritage-led restoration that puts heritage at the heart of every decision that we make. But at the same time, we're creating a home that has to be feasible for 21st century living. And this is really the trick. And Monsieur Didier is a master at working through the compromises that are required to execute this vision. And so the first question, whenever we uncover something at Pernon, is to ask, why is it like that? And is it original? Was it done like that at the end of the 18th century? And if so, why? And if we can save it, if we can preserve it, if we can restore it, then we do. But there are some compromises required for modern living. We need to have bathrooms and WCs, which really were not a feature of the 18th century. We need a modern kitchen, which can be the heart of living in a home like Pernon, not something that's stashed away in the basement that was designed only for the servants to work in and work from. And really, Monsieur Didier is fantastic at working through these challenges when they arise. When we have a problem, when we raise a concern, he'll go away and think about it. He always comes back with a solution. It may not be the solution that we first thought of, but so often we realise that his solution is even better than the suggestion that we were making, and that's really his experience coming through. And so, in short, there are differences of opinion from time to time, but with a shared vision, we've really found that we've been able to lead this restoration, this preservation project, in a direction that we're all comfortable with. Now, a technical question, a very technical question. A couple of people have asked why we paint over the hardware on the windows and the shutters. Shouldn't we be leaving those untreated and unpainted?
So I think it's important to point out that hardware is treated differently in different countries, and here in France in the 18th century, certainly at Pernon, the hardware was actually painted. We know this because there are traces of the original paint on the existing hardware, and our architect has discussed this with us, and so all the hardware here is painted because that's how it was originally treated in the 18th century when Pernon was constructed.
Another question about colours and how things are treated. Why do you wear odd coloured socks?
I think the answer to this is not going to put me in a very positive light because...
Well, you never know.
Because it happens quite randomly, actually. So I think it's important to point out that all our work gear is supplied by an iconic Australian brand, Hard Yakka, and the socks included. And the last delivery of socks had all these wonderful colours, and we all know what happens when you put socks through the wash. They get misplaced and they become difficult to match up again, and so that's been the case here, and they've just sort of stayed like that. Thanks for noticing. A few people have asked about our life here. So the questions are around what is our residency status, and a very interesting question, how are our bodies holding up?
Well, we're not French citizens, but we are here on 10-year renewable residency visas, and so that's our legal status. How are our bodies holding up? Well, I have to say, life here at Chateau de Pernon is very physical and it's very active. In fact, each day in a place like Pernon, you walk a long way, you walk up a lot of stairs, even if it's just to find one another. Life's pretty active. I'm a member of a running club.
And I take Truth for a run every morning.
Which she absolutely loves.
Yeah.
It's the highlight of her day. And on the subject of Truth, we've received some questions about her. So firstly, what breed is she?
So Truth is a cross between a Lagotto, which is an Italian water dog used for truffle hunting, and believe it or not, an Australian sheepdog. So she has some Aussie in her as well.
And Marianne asked whether or not she had found any truffles here at Pernon.
She has found truffles. She hasn't found them here at Pernon. So she was actually born in the truffle fields and she was weaned on truffles. So when she was a puppy, they had a large truffle that they kept in the freezer and they brought it out for the puppies to play with. And this was because the family were training one of the dogs to be a truffle hunter in their truffle fields and they didn't know which dog it would be. So she has had formal truffle training, which she has put to use once, and she found 3 truffles back at her first home where she was born. The first one she ate and the second 2 she managed to hand over, but not here at Pernon. The soil here is not right for truffles to grow.
So thank you for that question, Marianne. We love her to the moon and back. So there you go.
So this is a really interesting question. So over the last nearly 6 years during the restoration, we've all seen Pernon be transformed. And one of you asked, do we feel it looks too new?
Okay, so you're seeing Pernon at the moment. You're seeing it really transformed back to the way it would have looked when it was first constructed at the end of the 18th century. We're seeing the renders taking on the colour, the patina that they would have originally had, the shimmer on the slate roof, the zinc guttering gone, the TV antenna off the roof, the statues returned to their rightful place on the summit of Pernon. All of these things are taking the chateau back to its original appearance as it would have looked when it was first constructed. So it does raise a very interesting philosophical question, and this is what they call the ship of Theseus paradox. So this is a story from Greek mythology. A mythological king of Athens had a boat. They took it out each year to celebrate an important milestone in the history of Athens. And over the course of the repairs to this boat, every single element that was original was gradually repaired or changed. And the philosophical question is it still the same ship? And sometimes people ask us this question in the context of Chateau de Pernon. And we feel that putting the philosophical question to one side, Pernon really is in its original state. The 80% of the oak frame that supports the roof is the original oak frame. Most of the stone, despite all the changes to the facing stones, most of the stone on the building and of course the foundations themselves, they're all original. The window shutters are all original. We managed to find all of the original shutters and have them restored. The windows that have been restored, they're all original.
The glass panes in the windows.
Many of the glass panes are in fact original. You can see the imperfections in the way the glass catches the light. In so many ways, we're looking at Chateau de Pernon the way she would have looked at the end of the 18th century, and she's made from the materials, by and large, that she would have been made from when she was first constructed. Now, the one obvious exception is the slate roof itself. Every single piece of slate on the roof is new. And really, this was born of necessity. You can't part replace the slate tiles. If you mix and match, not only does it look terrible, but the roof will fail in no time. We had to use new slate and do it properly. And in fact, by doing so, you really are looking at the roof the way it would have looked when the chateau was first constructed. Now, Patricia has asked, how can people watching this video support our project?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that, Patricia. So the very first thing is by watching our YouTube videos. You are supporting us and the restoration project project here at Pernod. So we receive a share of the revenue from ad placements on our YouTube videos. And so if you are enjoying our YouTube videos, please do share them. And if you like them and subscribe and comment, that also really helps lift each video in the YouTube algorithm. Another way that you can support us is by purchasing our book. We produced a beautiful book called Château Reawakening, which also makes a lovely gift for Christmas. We also reclaimed the slate off the roof when we took the roof off the chateau, which we hand make here ourselves into a set of coasters, and these are also a really beautiful gift, and we are going to put them back on sale now. They have been off sale for a long time because it's Tim and I that make them, and we've been a bit sort of here, there and everywhere, but they are ready and back on sale now. So from today you will be able to buy them. We have to apologise to those of you in the United States. There is currently a suspension to shipping into the United States from La Poste. So the shipping will be done via FedEx, and the price is not the same as what it is with La Poste. And also Patreon. So we produce an exclusive weekly video every week for our Patreon and YouTube plus Patreon tier members. And so by signing up to Patreon or to becoming a YouTube member, you are also helping support the restoration. And that leads us to one of our final questions. What is our end goal?
Well, first and foremost, Château de Pernod is our home. It's always been a home, and this is our home, our only home. It's not a summer residence for us. This is where we live year round. But we don't want to create a B&B or a hotel. The interiors of the chateau are extremely fragile.
They're classé monument historique, so they're protected.
Yeah, it's not really feasible to run paid accommodation from Château de Pernod. Yeah. But we are absolutely committed to sharing our journey with people from all over the world. And it's not only by sharing it online through YouTube and Patreon and through the book and things like that. We want to share it through open days, and each year during open days we welcome well over 1,000 visitors to the chateau. We've done this every year since we arrived, and it's one of the great joys of being here is being able to share each milestone in the restoration of Château de Pernod with as many people as possible, particularly local people. This is part of their heritage, part of their history, and it's our joy to share it with people whose ancestors were part of making Château de Pernod what it is today. And we're thrilled that more and more at our open days, we're seeing people from around the world. And so please, if you're planning a trip to France and you'd like to come and see Château de Pernod, check the dates on our website in September. Over that weekend when we open the chateau, it is a wonderful time to be here at Château de Pernod and see all the progress that's being made.
Well, talking about having fun, Matthew actually asked us, are we having fun?
What a great final question. Well, we had the great honour of meeting President Macron at the Élysée Palace a couple of years ago, and when we met him, he asked, "Are you happy?" And it's such a disarmingly simple yet profound question. Yeah. So Matthew, you've won the prize for the most profound question. And in truth, while we have our ups and downs here all the time, and it's a challenging and difficult project, and sometimes we're uncomfortable and the work is physically difficult, the truth is that this project has been just the great joy of our lives. It has strengthened our relationship in ways that we could never have imagined, and despite all the ups and downs, every day is fun and we absolutely love it.
Well, that's a nice way to finish the video actually. And so a huge thank you to everybody for submitting your questions and for tuning in every Sunday to watch us. We enormously appreciate your support. We apologise that we couldn't answer all the questions, but we did our best to answer as many as possible. And so that's it from us this week. But as always, if you would like to follow the restoration of Château de Pernod more closely, we post an exclusive weekly video for our YouTube and Patreon members. We post frequent updates on all our social media channels, Instagram, Facebook and TikTok. Otherwise, just hit the subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and we will keep you updated here.